Well, welcome everybody to an Essex County Learning Community Professional Development Series. And this is the first of 4 sessions on Universal Design for Learning. And we are just so delighted to welcome you. And in a moment, we will welcome your teachers for the day. There are many familiar faces out there, and I'm so happy to see our frequent flyers. And there are also some unfamiliar faces. So for those of you who've never had an opportunity to be connected with ECLC, as we call it, previously, we especially welcome you into this community that is here to help all of you better meet the needs and the assets of diverse learners. That's our mission. And I have to say that ever since I first learned about Universal Design for Learning, I kind of fell in love with it because it serves all students, and it especially serves those who may not be served as well as we would all hope. So I'm just really delighted to have everybody here today. Because we've all come from different places, I just want us to take a moment to take 1 or 2 deep breaths and kind of set an intention for the next bit of time on sort of what you hope to accomplish, and a commitment to yourself to stay present. I'm saying that because I know how hard it's been for me recently with all the distractions, external and so forth, to just stay present in the moment. And so I think before we really settle into this space, it can be helpful. So just, if you want, close your eyes. Just take a deep breath. And exhale. Another breath. And exhale. And bring yourself into the room and to what you hope to learn today. Thank you. So now I would like to introduce your teachers for the day, and I am going to read their bios because I want to get it right. So we begin with Gabby Schlichtman, and Gabby is an applied education scientist by training, but her experience as a person with a learning disability has made her keenly aware of the unique strengths and perspective that disability can afford. She believes the best way to transform education is to do it in partnership with vulnerable youth and their teachers, with evidence and by design. Over her career, Gabby has developed a strong program of research and development that reimagines the design of education technology to support and empower youth with disabilities in learning. Her work is anchored by a commitment to bringing evidence-based solutions from the learning sciences to practical implementation at scale. Gabby's work has been supported through funding from the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences, the National Institutes of Health, the Oak Foundation, and others. Her research has been published in many refereed journals, and she is a co-editor of A Research Reader in Universal Design for Learning from Harvard Ed Press, 2012. As a leader, Gabby invites curious, diverse people to the table, creates the conditions for creativity, and inspires learning that echoes for the self, the group, and others. She is often invited to speak nationally and internationally, with recent engagements including Dyslexia Day on Capitol Hill and testimony at the Aspen Institute's Senior Congressional Education Staff Retreat, New Directions in Educational Innovation and Implications for Federal Policy. She's currently an adjunct lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she teaches the course Emotion and Learning. Gabby and I've worked together for a number of years now, and so I've had multiple exposures to UDL, and I have to say that every single time I learn something more. So I'm excited to introduce Gabby to all of you. And I'm also excited to introduce to you Dr. Laura Vanderberg. She is the director of the Program for the Advancement of Learning and a professor at Curry College. And just in parentheses, she runs the program that my daughter attends at Curry College and it is designed for kids with learning differences. And it's been a wonderful experience, and I thank her personally. She brings 15 years of experience designing curriculum and implementing educational program evaluations for various types of learners in settings both inside and outside the classroom. Laura has received awards for her work in supporting educational excellence, including an award from the Ukrainian National Ministry of Education for the introduction of innovative TEFL methodologies, as well as the Change Agent Award and Outstanding Contribution to Undergraduate Education Award at Tufts University. Most recently, as Assistant Dean of Assessment and Planning in the College of Education and Human Development at UMass Boston, she designed college-wide assessment practices and collaborated to support accreditation within the college and university. As a principal investigator, she's overseen grants from the U.S. Agency for International Development and the U.S. Department of Education to train educators and study learning and cognition. In the field, she's been referred to as a brilliant scientist specializing in assessment, and to her colleagues, she's known as an educator committed to student growth and development. Her professional research uses an interdisciplinary lens to understand students with learning differences and their educational trajectories. Laura was also named an Apple Distinguished Educator. Welcome, Laura. So delighted to have you here, Laura Vanderberg. And finally, I'd like to introduce Amanda Cook. And Amanda works with Gabby at Ed Together as a researcher and administrative assistant. And she's also a former elementary educator in from the greater Boston area. So to all three of you, welcome. We're so excited for these next 4 sessions, and I am happily turning it over to all of you.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
We're so glad to be here with all of you. And I know these are crazy times. So I was just telling Jane before we started that last year for this day, this session, we had a whole day, and it was an awesome exercise and daunting to pull that together and be like, what are the essential parts? What's relevant now? What is relevant to virtual, hybrid, and in person? How can we best help these educators? And so it's been a great experience to pull this together, and we're really excited to share with you today. So just a couple of logistical notes before we get started. If you haven't gotten in our drive already, there's a link, and it's also in the chat if you scroll up a little bit. In our drive, you will find links to this deck, along with all of the tools and resources that you'll need during the session. And when you get into your breakout rooms, the facilitators can help you get in there if you're having trouble getting in, but feel free to be live in the deck. We also wanted to point out that we are recording this session, not the breakout rooms. Those are confidential. What happens in the breakout room should stay in the breakout room, because we're going to be sharing a lot about our practice in those spaces, except for summary things that we want to share to the group. But the main session will be recorded, just so you know. We are also offering live captions via Otter AI live notes. So if you look, it should be somewhere towards the top of your Zoom screen. If you want that and you're having trouble finding it, please ping Diana, who can help point you at that. But basically, if you find that link that you see there, and click on the small arrow, you'll be able to get the live captions and notes as we're talking. We will have one 15-minute break right in the middle at 2:25. But if you need a break, take a break. That's fine. And we just are hoping that you'll be you. Don't feel like you have to sit on Zoom with your face in the camera the whole time. In the interest of UDL, we know everybody is different. So no judgment space here. And Laura and I, in prepping the beginning of this session, we just wanted to bring to the table these sort of core UDL norms, which I know that you all have been beginning to think about as members of the second cohort for ECLC. So this idea that diversity and equity and inclusion is a thread in all we do. So everything that we talk about today And through each of these sessions and the work we do together is thinking about practical ways to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we should have that front of mind. In this context, we're going to confront and struggle with hard and new ideas. We're going to get feedback from students. We're going to try to empathize and understand where they are relative to our practice. Sometimes that feels really hard. But that's a part of this process, and we're going to own it and be present in it together. And in that context, we are absolutely committed to learning and continuous improvement. That is the name of the game. Oftentimes, I start working with a district or a group of teachers, and it's like, let's UDL, get it done for next year. And it's like, let's do that. But also, this is a practice for your whole career. It's all about continuous improvement. Okay, and in the interest of humanizing Laura and I from that awesome introduction that Jane gave, we just wanted to share a little bit about ourselves and where we are today and what we have in mind, because these are crazy times. So in addition to the work that Jane described, I'm also a mom. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I have a son who's 6 years old. He just started kindergarten fully online. This is him last year when we were on vacation together. As Jane mentioned, I'm dyslexic and struggled really substantially in school. I didn't actually learn to read with any fluency until I was in the 8th grade. But was able to go on, was able to go on to get my doctorate from Harvard, to major in neuroscience in college. And I read and write a lot today, but I still use technology to help me do so, assistive technology. My son last year just got a diagnosis of a reading-related disability. It may be dyslexia. We don't have a specific diagnosis yet, but he really was not responding to reading instruction. But he is a crazy, persistent, intensely focused little guy. Here you can see him on our trip to Disney World. He's fighting Darth Vader at the Jedi training, and he's like airborne there, man. He has got it all going on. And he treats his reading instruction this way. He treats all of his classes this way. He is like focused and interested, and he wants to tell you about what's what. When he got his diagnosis last year, this is his kindergarten classroom that was shut down in March, as all the classrooms were. It was devastating. We didn't know what was going to happen. He had just started to receive reading intervention services, which moved online. And this is him now in 1st grade in our home doing his remote learning. He has a full day of online curriculum. This is him in his music class doing learning about rhythm. And we don't know what's going to happen, but we're doing our best to balance all these things together. And I have him in mind when I'm thinking about universal design, because it's amazing in my house right now. It's like a dyslexic person teaching another dyslexic person how to read in 1st grade. I never thought I was going to do that. Actually, I'm more like a para, I think, is what's happening. It's really interesting. Anyway, that's me and my family right now. Laura?
Okay, that's one of my favorite anecdotes. So I will give you a little bit about myself. I'm a mother too, and my daughter is now 5. And I am recently the primary caretaker for my father, who has some significant health challenges. And during the pandemic, we had to move him out of assisted living and try to find a way to keep him safe and minimize exposure. So I have set him up with an apartment or a condo, 1 door down from me, and I am currently wiring that place with home automation so that he can be as independent as possible, and I can be as free as possible to support him in his independence. So that is me with my dad there. Then that's my brother FaceTiming with my dad. The first time my dad got like FaceTime up and running and did it himself, my brother's in Hawaii. And then the little tiny picture is one of my motion activated cameras in his place. And you can see my husband's like creeping in to show my dad how to turn up the volume on FaceTime. So I just feel so fortunate in the midst of all of the terrible things that have happened. I feel fortunate that I have these tools at my disposal and that I can create an environment for him that can be responsive. So if he's struggling with talking to Bob, then my husband is willing to go down and be like, you press this button right here and you can turn it up. It's my daughter. This is picture day this fall, and she picked out everything she's wearing herself. So it was like this blue and red gingham thing with like tasseled socks. And then she just went with the bright pink metallic gladiator sandals on top and matched it to her mask and her pigtails. And when I saw her ready for pictures, I was like, I cannot imagine like the little brain that put all that together. And this is her remote learning space up top. And this is her making a tiny cappuccino machine out of Legos to share for, and it's like mobile, like the milk steamer moves. And she's her own thing. She totally shut down during spring with Zoom during the pandemic and would not engage at all in remote learning. And we had to do a complete turnaround for this fall. So I have experienced what you're experiencing and am both the parent and the teacher right now. Thank you for having us.
Oops. So go ahead, Laura.
Okay, so most importantly, we want you to get out of this whatever you need to get out of this. Take care of yourselves. We're all coming differently to this place today, and we're all going to make something new and unusual, hopefully, out of what we bring and what we do. And we welcome that difference, and we welcome that variability, and we hope you take care of yourselves, and we are here to support you.
Okay, so the plan for the series, we're right in the midst of discovery here. So we're not going to get into the technical parts of the framework today, or the guidelines or design work. That happens in session 2 and session 3. Today, what we are focused on is really discovery. We have a challenge, and all of our challenges, as Laura said, are a little different. We're going to ask you to find something to focus on, your sort of most pressing problem, a lesson that you have coming up that you can work on in this space over the next weeks and months. And we're really going to inquire. So today we're really focused on this piece about discovery. So what kind of methods, how can we approach learning from our students to understand what barriers they are experiencing so that we might better respond. So this part is really about methods and an approach and listening through empathy in order to understand, so that when we get to session 2 and 3 and we start to leverage the network, we can really, or the framework of UDL, we're doing that in an informed way that's about our kids. And then finally, the last session is going to deal explicitly with thinking about sustainability. So like, how do we get, now that we've done something and we'll share our outputs with each other, how do we get from there to sustainable long-term change, both in our own practice and bringing it back to our schools and our district. And I just walked through this. Okay, so with the interest of getting to know you all, connect and create belonging in this group, because we're laying the basis for working together over the next few months, Laura is going to lead us through an activity.
Okay, so what we're going to do first is borrow from a small company, Black-owned small company that is interested in creating belonging and connection. And that's really our goal here with you. And first, we want to establish rapport with you, and we want for you to feel, hopefully, ultimately connected to this space so that you can learn. So when we go into the next slide, the company that we've borrowed from is called Actually Curious, and we're going to go into some great breakout rooms. And you'll be matched with a facilitator moderator, and that facilitator moderator will walk you through some cards. And the cards are going to have some stimulating questions on them. So the first thing we're going to do is flip a card, and we're going to read what the card says. And then a few of us, like 2 to 3 of us, will answer. And then the moderator will pick the next person to read. We're going to play this game for about 7 minutes as just a quick way to break the ice and come together. And our goal is to not really monitor what we're saying, but really to give sort of a gut response so that we can get to know each other as we are right now. So Diana is going to pop us into some breakout rooms.
And we're back.
Perfect. That was like a very abrupt backness for me.
Yeah, I know. I think we did get everybody in my group to have a chance though. And it was just awesome to hear all the positive things, that this is a strange situation, but people have ways in which they, in my group, I learned that they're a secure bunch, that they like what they do. This is a weird situation, but they're finding ways to laugh and be present. I'm wondering, the other facilitators, what did you learn about your crew?
I learned my group has some common themes around connection to family and caring about learning, their own learning and the learning of others.
I learned that lots of people are grateful for the weather that we're having right now.
Yeah.
I learned from my group that we are sharing a lot of struggles and loss and difficulty right now, and we're also sharing a lot of empathy, and because so many of the things that we went over in the questions relate to our students, and so I think there's a lot of thinking about how others are feeling and matching that to our lives, and just trying to bring a lot of empathy to the space.
Similar to Jane, I learned that we are very grateful for the weather, but also very grateful for our family and our support systems that are in place during this, and that there's a lot of silly things that can make us laugh, but then there's a lot of other kind of more emotional, hard things that can make us cry during this time.
Awesome. Thank you, facilitators. And we're going to get the chance to learn even more about each other, because today is all about empathy. So what tools can we systematically use to really understand our students and what barriers they're experiencing so we can design for them? And you can check out more of this deck. I know I only got through like 5 cards in my group, but there's a lot more cards that we adapted. And of course, you can adapt them to whatever questions that you are interested in learning about from your students. And so we provided that tool for you, and we'll talk a little more about it later today. All right, so let me share my screen. Okay, so I know we're all coming to this in different places, and we haven't, in terms of UDL, and we haven't, not all of you were able to come to the Summer Institute, but a lot of you, what I find when I give these trainings, a lot of people have heard something about UDL, or maybe they've had a really intensive training. So we're all kind of coming to it with different background knowledge. And I'm wondering, just to get a sense of the room, what does the term universal design for learning mean to you? And you can pop that into the chat. So just take a minute to reflect and just pop your answers into the chat.
Invented spelling is fine.
Yes, absolutely. Learning opportunities, inclusion, accessibility, good teaching practices, choice, a way of molding your curriculum to fit the needs of all students, learning opportunities. I'm seeing a lot on opportunities. Togetherness, yes, the emotional part, excellent. Access, keeping learning exciting and engaging for everyone by providing opportunities for everyone to feel comfortable. Absolutely. A huge part of this is emotional, high expectations and opportunities for all. Absolutely. connections, design thinking. Yes, we're going to be using design thinking as a method here, beginning with empathy. Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. Whoops. Deck here. So we're all really in different places, although I'm seeing lots of similar themes in what you were dropping into the chat there in terms of our understanding and our journey with UDL, and that's okay. Our goal here over the course of these sessions is to develop a common understanding by learning to do UDL, right? So instead of talking about the themes and the pillars, we will talk about the principles and the guidelines, but we're going to be talking about them from the perspective of this is a tool that you can use to design for more equitable, inclusive practice and how to do that. And we're going to be doing it in a practical way. So even after this first session, you're going to be pivoting right away to do empathy work with your students to really understand the barriers that they may be experiencing given a pressing problem that you're trying to design for. So that's okay. Don't worry about it if you are not sure about UDL. We're going to get into it, but today is about empathy. So the first core understanding that I hope that everybody can come away from, and I'm seeing that in the chat already, and that is that the UDL framework is really about embracing and designing for variability. This idea that we're not, we really are quite variable from each other in all different kinds of ways. And so I'm wondering if you can drop into the chat what comes to mind when you think about the word variability as it relates to students in general or to your students. Go ahead and share that into the chat. No such thing as average. Everyone has access. Each student is different ways of doing things, accepting differences between students. Absolutely. So I'm here to tell you today that individuals, students, teachers, everyone are remarkably variable. And the research literature on developmental psychology, no matter how hard we try to really focus on the ways people are similar, the message that comes out over and over and over again across all studies is that individuals are remarkably variable. It is the rule in developmental psychology and human development. So I just want to share with you two examples about that might surprise you, and one that might not surprise you. So one, when we think about variability, we're really talking about sort of two kinds of variability. So one is that students vary over time and between each other. So this is some data I want to share with you. Don't feel overwhelmed. I'm going to walk you through it if you're not don't love looking at data. So what we have here is a measure of working memory, which you see on the vertical axis, where higher scores mean higher capacity for working memory. And across the horizontal axis, you see age in years, going from, the data extends from 6 years to, I think, 20 years. And so what I want to point out to you here is that even within a particular age band, so if you look at 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, the black dots are individuals, and the lines across the middle are the average, essentially. And what you see is that individuals really vary quite substantially, even around something like working memory, which we think of as being something that's fairly consistent across people, unless you're dealing with a special education situation where a person might have a disability related to their working memory, right? And I'm here to tell you that in the population, we vary substantially, even within a set age band. And you can see that in this data. The data, our working memory also changes significantly over time. So it increases over the early years. So you'll see students improving over time, and then it levels off, and then it actually tails down later in life, which I'm not showing this on this graph here. So we do vary even on these really concrete skills that we think people might be consistent about over time and between students. And there's also variability within students, even within the same day. So I want to show you two writing samples from a first grader. So this is a student in essentially his spelling class, where they're working on writing accuracy and fluency. And this is dictation work that the student was doing. So you can see he's written here, Ben is my pal. The pet was, sorry, my chat is fast. And you can see the accuracy is pretty good. This is in first grade. He's using capital letters appropriately, using the period appropriately, forming, as I said, uppercase and lowercase letters. And then this is the same student, but a different activity. So this is literally in the same week of work. This is a Friday letter, where at the end of the week, the students do a brainstorm with their teacher about what they learned that week. And then they write a letter home to a parent or a student. This is a weekly activity. And the first thing that they have to write is something that they're proud of, so that you can see that this student wrote, the first line is, I am proud of. And then he says, my, and then I can't read this line here. And then below that, he has to write something else interesting that happened. And he writes, we, he substituted a U for a W, had a birthday party, is what he's written there. And you can see it's the same student, same week, but here he's being asked to be working on his thinking, right? Getting his thinking out. And so the fluency component and the accuracy component become really difficult, because the goal here, the focus is really around getting his ideas out on the paper and managing this format of the letter. So he's really quite variable in the week. This is a dyslexic student in first grade. So this is something that UDL can help you with, because it's really about thinking, what is the specific goal? And then scaffolding around that specific goal. And then more broadly than that, building in supports outside of that, those pieces that are construct irrelevant. So for example, with the second writing piece, we might have the student use a speech to text writer, so that the burden, so that he can get out what he has to say, instead of really struggling with the active writing in of itself. So students are variable between, they're variable across the lifespan, and they're variable within. So even within the context of a week, the same skill. So now we have an activity that we want to get into, where we're really going to start to flex those empathy skills. And this is an activity that you can do with your students that you may choose to do between now and session 2. And the goal here is to understand yourself and how your experiences and identity as a learner, or in other ways, you can choose other things that you want to address, impacts your decision-making as a teacher. So this is what's called the River of Life activity, and it is an activity for narrative sense making. So what we want you to do is, in a second, we're going to give you access to a Google Draw canvas that has some aspects of this visualization that you can drag and drop, and then you can draw your visualization of your life as you developed as a learner. So the idea is to really visually describe your journey, the ebbs and flows that brought you to the learner that you are today. It's a kind of historical timeline. Oops, let me bring this up here. It's a kind of historical timeline with key events and transformations. So you're going to detail challenges and barriers. These might be represented as dams, rapids, and waterfalls, and you can label them. You'll see there's labels on the Google Draw canvas. Resources and strengths, these might be represented as calm waters or open lakes. Mentors and influencers, these are the tributaries. And then you're going to have a chance for a few of you to share your canvas with your small group and talk about your journey that brought you from when you were very young in the beginning to the learner you are today, and what brought that about. And then we won't have time for everyone to share, but we want 1 or 2 people to share. And then we're going to have a discussion after you have the chance to do this activity and reflect on your own growth and development and who you are as a learner. We're going to have a discussion about what strategies and supports you feel like were most useful to you and are most useful to you and impactful to you when you were a student, and when you're trying to learn something now. And then we're going to capture those as a large group.
Okay, so when you break out into your groups, I'm going to give you a sense of what you're going to see.
Do you want to share, Laura?
Yes. So you're going to go into the drive. You can see my screen, right? All right, you'll go into the drive. You're going to see this River of Life folder. You're going to click in the River of Life, and there will be a Google Draw for each of you. And if there is not one for you, there are extra River of Life canvases in this upper one. So I'm just going to click in there because I made one for myself in there. And when you hop in, you're going to see that the template pieces that Gabby was talking about have been built for you. You can make this however you would like. All right. So you can literally drag and drop and play however you would like. If you don't want to do it this way and you don't want to drag and drop, please feel free to make your own. I mean, you can go up here and, you can draw or make your own lines. You could make bridges, whatever you wanted. The sky is the limit. And the goal is for you to take some time to think about your learning, think about your development, and try to represent it in a way that makes sense to you. So we're going to hop into breakout rooms, and then we're going to take 10 minutes in our breakout rooms to do our drawings somewhat independently.
Laura, just to clarify, how long should folks stay in breakouts? Because after the drawing, I imagine there's discussion.
Yep. So 10 minutes for the drawing. And then let's do like 15 minutes for sharing in a small group.
Sure. So I'll tell you when 10 minutes have passed, and then I will give you a 5-minute warning before pulling the group back.
Diana, hold on one second, because there's a third part. I'm sorry. We're going to discuss as a group what strategies and supports are most useful. So it should be 10 plus 15 share River of Life plus 10. So
10, 15, 10.
Yeah.
So really 35 minutes in breakouts, and I'll give you a 10, 15, 10 warning. How about that?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we had a great discussion, and you can see in the slide catcher, you can revisit the slide, see all the various things that came out of the different groups. And Laura, I'm sure you have some thoughts about this, but I'm looking at this and I'm seeing relationships being absolutely key, both in terms of creating sense of belonging and knowing our students in terms of how to support and challenge, right? Creating those productive challenges for students. I think we had a good discussion about routines and organization, sort of supporting executive functioning. I'm putting those words on it, but that's the kind of themes that I was hearing about, creating interest and engagement for students. What else, what did you notice, Laura?
So, I found some really, in our group, we had some, and it's hard to see, but it's like in the bottom of that first green one, I kept typing, but it's there nested in the bottom. If you could, like shrink the font somehow, it would probably show up. But as my group, transitioned across their, I'll just call it adversities, they talked about a variety of like things that had to do with metacognitively being able to see when change needed to happen, either because it was handed to them as disaster, or it was handed to them as stagnation, or the experience of stagnation, or the experience of chance. And this ability to be able to see when they needed to take the initiative to do something to alter the course of their own destiny, which I found really interesting. So sometimes it was it was given to them, and then sometimes it was very strategically sort of negotiated with another person. So I think we as teachers have that capacity to be that strategic negotiator and offer students, and as parents too, as coaches, as music teachers. There are a variety of like relationships across professions that I think we can step into as teachers to strategically negotiate change, positive change for our students.
Awesome. Well, I encourage you all to take a peek at the list of things that came out from all the groups. And what I want to do now is pivot from our own experience and variability and start to think about students. So I want to share a video with you. This is a video of a student named Noah. He's in the 11th grade and he has attention issues. This is a student case study from understood.org. If you don't know about Understood, I would definitely encourage you to go check it out. It's a resource for parents and now educators in thinking about how to support and understand students with learning and attention issues. So let's have a listen to Noah, but be thinking about what supports and strategies he might need to be built into a flexible UDL classroom to be successful. So here's Noah.
I'm Noah. I'm in the 11th grade, and paying attention is not easy for me. Having attention issues is like having warfare with yourself. Your mind is telling you don't move, but your muscles and your body and everything else is telling you get up and move your feet. You're either tapping your knee, tapping your hand, playing with the desk, doing something that makes you want to move, but you can't. When the teacher would try to get my attention, I would kind of play a TV show in my head. Like a TV show would literally play in my head. I'll make all these weird little sound effects, a little like, teacher will be like, stop that. I'll be like, okay. Then I'll just go back to doing it again. They'll be like, stop that. And I'll be like, okay. And I'll just go back to doing it again. And it really gets them frustrated. I'm more frustrated with myself because I can't stop. Didn't have many friends, probably one friend. And if that, probably within a couple weeks, he thought it was weird and he didn't want to talk to me. It felt like I was the only one with this problem. And even when they did say they knew how I felt, they didn't really. I was taking Latin 2 years ago for the first time. Anytime I would try to learn this language, I would go do an exercise. There would be a syllable. I would do a push-up and say the word. Some way to grab my attention, to have my full attention. Sometimes I would put on my thumb or I would tap my foot. Something would have to be moving so I would remember that I need to keep on track with the book. A year ago, I had to write an essay paper in a couple of hours. So I have a certain set time and there was no way I was going to pay attention, but I told myself I was going to pay attention. So I used all the little things that I used to pay attention. I got that paper done before anybody else in that class. And I was so happy. I was out of there. I was free 20 minutes in advance. Oh, felt so good.
Okay, so I'm sure all of you have run into students like Noah before, and I want you to take a second to think and reflect on the strategies and supports that you brought to the surface through the River of Life activity. And now think about Noah and what strategies and supports, like what do you hear from him that he needs? If you're really listening to understand, what kind of flexibility does he need in the classroom to be successful? And you can drop that into the chat. Yeah, the freedom to move around, using his body to self-regulate and having space for that, choice, movement breaks, checking in with him. So again, relational, like what is his plan, empowering him to have the space to be successful and use the strategy he knows he needs. Absolutely. So again, relationships at the core, being able to learn kinesthetically, having a space where you're not creating barriers for this student, independence to apply strategies, trust in his decisions. Yeah, visual supports. Yeah, ways for him to cue to you when he needs help, right? How is he going to cue? Like if you're in a trusting relationship, when he's having difficulty focusing, self-regulation techniques. Yeah, so learning the SEL parts are really critical, not just about community, but it's about him learning to self-regulate so that he can learn. Absolutely, ask him for his ideas. He's very involved and knowledgeable. He's very not metacognitive about his own learning. And most kids have knowledge of that if we can tap into it. Absolutely, great. Okay, oops, stop. All right, so we're not gonna catch there. So what I wanted to just say at this point is that basically we've been talking about learner variability, our own. We've sort of been reflecting on where we are as learners, how that brought us to where we are as teachers, where we are as learners now in our life, the kinds of supports and strategies that help us and students. Now we're pivoting to students and how are they different from us and what might they need that's different. And so there really is this concept of learner variability. It's an approach to instruction that's based on variability that we know is there from the cognitive and affective sciences. There are no average learners, and UDL is an approach that lets us really think about, begin with empathy, begin with understanding, where we're really inquiring in order to understand, so that we might respond by building in flexibility that addresses the needs of those kids who are most marginalized, building flexibility into the classroom that helps all learners. So let's just take a quick look at this video from Shelley Moore. She's amazing. I want to suggest that you check out her channel. It's called 5 More Minutes. These short essays basically on thinking about special education. And she has an awesome metaphor for how to think about UDL in the classroom and student variability. So let's have a listen to this.
Hi, my name is Shelley Moore, and I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. As Canadians, we have a reputation for finding and embracing the strength in our diversity. This value, however, hasn't been reflected in our classrooms, which still segregates students by ability, especially students with developmental disabilities. There's a gap in our understanding about what we know inclusive education to be philosophically versus what we understand and the importance of understanding inclusion in our practice. This is the question I'm trying to answer in my research, is how can we find the value in the day-to-day practice in our classrooms in terms of inclusive education? So how am I going to explain this to you? Now I can sit here and try and describe this, or we can have a little bit more fun. Why don't we go bowling? So let's talk about bowling. You have 10 pins, you have 2 balls, and you have a lane. The goal is to knock down as many pins as you can. But if you don't get them all, it's okay because you have another chance. But when I bowl and roll the ball down the middle and I don't knock them all down, what often ends up happening to me is that there's 2 pins left standing on either end and they stare at you. It's the 7-10 split and it's the hardest shot in bowling. How is bowling like teaching? The ball is the lesson, the pins are the kids. We aim for the middle, we do the best we can. The pins that are left standing, we often have another chance to kind of get to them, but at the end of the day, those 2 pins that are staring, looking at you are kids who need the most support and are kids who need the most challenge. So we end up choosing one and the other one is left standing. I just took all the fun out of bowling. Now, I don't know how many times you've watched professional bowling, but I spent an afternoon watching professional bowling. And let me tell you, there was not one bowler who rolled that ball down the middle of the lane. They throw the ball down the lane at a curve. And I was actually really curious about this. So I called up a professional bowler. He was so excited. I don't think he gets a lot of calls about education. He said the reason why the ball has to enter at a curve is because you will knock down more pins and create a bigger domino effect if you enter at that angle. But in order to do that, you have to change your aim. In order to knock down the most pins with one shot, he aims for the pins that are the hardest to hit. Now let's just let this sink in for a second. We are taught to teach the head pins. We are not taught to teach the kids who are the furthest and the hardest to get to. The kids with autism, the kids with Down syndrome. The part that's critical here, and it really aligns with universal design for learning, is that so often the supports that we design for those kids on the outside of the lane are actually supports that all of the kids need. This is the part we need to understand if inclusive education is going to move forward in Canada. How can we find this value of diversity in our classrooms between the students? This is not just important for the outside pins, but it's critical for every single one of us. And just think, all we need to do is change our aim. Look how bowling changed education.
I love this little video, and it really transitions us to think about, oh my gosh, there's all this variability. How can I possibly teach all these kids at the same time? And what she's saying is, and this is like the underlying theme under UDL, is what you need to do is pay attention to the kids who are most marginalized. That can mean thriving and struggling. And when we think about those kiddos, if we really work to understand them, then we can use the guidelines to build in the flexibility that we need to meet all the needs in the classroom, right? And so when we get back, the key to this, though, the undergirding key to this is that we have to learn to empathize systematically as a part of our routine, because our personal experience and even all the kids we've taught before doesn't necessarily reflect the kids who are in front of us now, or the classroom conditions, as we all know now, that we're currently experiencing. So how can we systematically empathize? How can we bring those methods to bear in the space? So let's take a break, a 10-minute break. And when we get back, we're gonna get into those methods. Okay, so what we wanna do with this remaining time is tee up what we want you to do in between now and the next session, which I promise won't be too overwhelming. We're all too overwhelmed. And it should really just become, hopefully you're probably already doing some of this, but it just makes it more robust to help you think about it. So we've been talking a lot about this idea of empathy and why empathy is important. Like, why should we have that be a part of our practice? Why is it the basis of UDL? Oops. Well, the key idea here is that we want to disrupt this cycle of misunderstanding between teachers and students. So we've just been talking about the river of life and learning, and how, you know, our identity is really formed by our experience, our education, who we are, how we're perceived to the world, and our expertise that we build over time. And that informs who we are as a learner and as a teacher. And that also forms the basis of assumptions, bias, projections of identity, our own identity onto our students and the curriculum, and eventually the instructional choices that end up reflecting me or other students that I've worked with successfully, rather than the students who are right in front of me now. So why does this happen? The basis is in the neurosciences, really. So over time and with experience, your brain becomes more and more efficient. And to accomplish this efficiency, your brain creates an internal and predictive model of the world. So when you're first a teacher, you remember how overwhelmed you are, or if you're facing, now we're all in this new situation, right? Where we've never taught virtually, we become overwhelmed with the sensory world because we have to take in all this information because we don't have expertise about it. And our brain is trying to build a model. Over time, you build that model, and in order to be efficient, your brain basically uses more information from inside yourself than outside the world. There's tons of research literature on this. It's super interesting. So you become expert based on your experience, but that also closes you off from learning new things or noticing when things change in the environment. So the perfect example of this is you basically create simulations of the world that you depend on to operate in the world. So here's an example. There is actually no box here. It's created in the negative space, but your brain creates it. Like, you can't unsee the box because you have expertise about how lines align to form a square. And it's the same thing in your teaching and your learning. You create expertise and it makes you become more internally focused. So how do we break this cycle? We have to use empathy as a practice. We have to orient to the outside world. We have to inquire in order to understand and not necessarily to respond right away. And UDL is in fact an empathy anchored process. Design thinking, which is an approach that we can use to UDL, is an empathy anchored process. And so what we try to do is to routinize practices that keep us focused on information from the world, And through these practices like empathy interviewing, journey mapping, we really want to ask kids, we want to be oriented to them. We want to be effortful to develop emotional and cognitive empathy. How do you feel, right? Inquiring about how another person feels is really the best formative assessment. If we get used to talking about, you know, do you feel challenged today? Do you feel supported? Are you confused? And having kids be able to bring those words to the table, you will get information about where they are and how they're experiencing your space way more quickly than if you put a formative assessment, cognitive assessment tool in front of them. So using emotion, we want to start to use emotion, have conversations about emotion in order to understand how kids are experiencing our space. And then cognitive empathy, what are the causes of why they are feeling that way that relate to the design of the environment? Where does flexibility need to be improved? Understanding ourselves and how our identity as a learner, which we explored today as a teacher, impacts our teaching and our choices. What's inside our head versus being present to what's happening in the world. And then, looking for commonalities and differences between self and others. So ourself and our students, and understanding what we don't know and sort of owning that in the space, and knowing that you have resources in your building and beyond that can support you to build out your practice. So we're going to ask you to do some empathy work between now and session 2, and we have some tools for that. Laura, do you want to orient us? Oh no, did we lose Laura? There she is.
So, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Sorry.
Okay. Can you see my screen too?
Yes, we are.
All right. So what we would like to do is have you use these tools to start to think about, what do you need to know? How will you find it out? And which tools might you use and how might you use them? And we're going to walk through some of the methods, and you've already got experience with them. So this will actually, I think, feel a little bit familiar. So again, the methods that we're going for is to understand your own perspective. And we spent a good deal of time in that today. And we'll talk about the 2 tools that we use today and the reactions of others. And so you probably were able to garner some of the reactions of others in our breakout rooms today as well. We want to gain familiarity and practice and facility with describing someone else's perspective. And we're going to give you some tools for getting that familiarity and that facility. And then how might you see the world from your students' point of view or from others' points of views? Figure out where maybe your perspective or your understanding of yourself does and doesn't overlap with others' perspectives and others' understanding of themselves. And then after you do that work, between now and next session, we are going to start to make the connections between the data that you gather and the actions that you might take. But your job between now and next session is just to gather information. You don't need to react to it or make any decisions on it right now. So you had the Actually Curious slide deck, and it's posted in the Google Slides. So what you can do if you would like it is copy it for yourself. You can edit it to be more advanced or less advanced based on the age that you're working with. Gabby has a physical copy of the cards. So if you have any questions about like what kinds of cards are there besides the few that we popped in there, please feel free to reach out to us. You can copy that slide deck, edit it as you would like. You could use Actually Curious for getting to build some empathy with your students. And then you have the River of Learning activity, and you could ask students to do that. And you have your own River of Learning. You could create more. So I always like to think, like, with my students who are really good at drawing and representing knowledge through different means, that this River of Learning activity might be really good for them, especially if they have a tablet. Some of your districts might, and then they can be able to draw on the Google Drawing as well. Another option is to do an empathy interview. And this is a process by which you actually are focused on talking and interacting with a student. You could start with one student, you could do a focus group. Essentially, you're trying to get as much information as possible about how the students are feeling, seeing the world, experiencing, and making choices. So when you do an empathy interview, you can start very broad. A goal would be to establish a relationship with the student and really think about asking open-ended questions so that you're giving them space to express how they experience things, how they feel, how they see the world, and the choices that they're making. So here are some examples, they're listed here. And then probe with why questions. And here are some examples here. And then what we're going to do is be able to anchor these to the UDL principles as we go on. So you'll see these next few questions are actually questions that are using language from the UDL principles about engagement and motivation. How do you best perceive and comprehend? And how do you navigate the learning environment and express what you know? So you could ask them these questions. You can edit these questions because they're going to be different depending on the levels that you're going to be working with. Your job, if you did an empathy interview, would just be to gather as much information as possible, not to judge the information, but really to archive it, to gather it, to note it. Then you might have something very simple. For some of our students, for all of us, not for our students, not for some of our students, for all of us right now, especially, the world in which we're living is presenting so many diverse stimuli that our mood can literally change from moment to moment. And I think we got a really, good sense of that even over this last week. So based on the mood meter, and Gabby's going to describe it coming out of her work with Yale, we might be able to give students and ourselves a way to access them from a metacognitive perspective, how they are feeling and what they are bringing to the table or bringing to the learning scenario. So Gabby's going to describe what she has with her son, Ben, and I'm going to give you a tool that you can use with your students.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. So I did want to mention with the empathy interview that we have created a bank of questions for you that you don't have to worry about this right now, but they are anchored to the UDL guidelines, which can help you for next week. So Laura's just going to show us these right now.
So they're in there. It's an entire bank of questions. So if you want more specifics, they are there.
And you wouldn't ask all these questions. It's just to give you an idea, a more concrete idea about what we're talking about, the kind of questions that you might ask. The mood meter is a way for you to start with how kids are feeling, which I mentioned instead of like the cognitive, metacognitive piece. So rather to say, they just came out of a lesson, or you could do this at the beginning of the day and say, let's check in how much energy is in your body. So toward the top on the vertical is like, I have a lot of energy in my body. I feel very activated. And toward the bottom is total calmness, where the very, very bottom is like you feel like you want to lounge on the couch and you're almost falling asleep, where the middle is neutral. And then across the horizontal axis, it's pleasantness. So how positive and negative do I feel, with the middle being neutral. And again, all the way to the right, the most positive, happy you could imagine feeling, and all the way to the left, sort of negative, sad, lethargic. The boxes, the quadrants, make out the interaction of those two. So the if you think about, there's been a bunch of research on this, the sort of perfect zone of learning is sort of in the green quadrant, but a little bit high on the arousal space, right? So you're like feeling positive, but you're pretty calm, right? you can think about being in the red space as being confused, feeling agitated in response to like some really intense content. Sometimes conversations about social justice will like yield, or politics will yield people being in this space. It's not necessarily negative. You're not threatened, but you're in this kind of intense space. And then all the way down in the blue can be lethargic, sad, or bored or disengaged. So the idea here, and again, you don't have to use the mood meter. You could just have questions about like how much energy is in your body, how pleasant or unpleasant do you feel. You could just ask for emotion words. And then the key is to say why. Why do you feel that way? So this representation is actually, my son's school uses the Ruler SEL curriculum. The mood meter is a tool that they're using. He's in first grade. And this is the representation they use on Seesaw for his online learning. So every morning they are supposed to place a star on the mood meter. And they've had some talk about how to do that. And then tell why using the voice recording. And I'll tell you, once you get kids talking about their emotions, if you ask why, they'll give you everything else.
Okay, now for us, we've created in your empathy tools in the Drive a version of this that's possible to use with higher levels as well. And I think some of us, we've become, you know, from like a Vygotskian perspective, so shaped by language that we can't even understand abstract concepts without the language tag to it. So I just want you to shout out, and by shout, I mean, you know, Zoom shout out. So that means unmute yourself and use your voice, how you're feeling right now. And I will pop a symbol on there so that we can all sort of see where we are. Anybody, go ahead.
Bent.
What did you say?
Bent.
Where was that? Give me a color.
It's blue on the bottom.
Bent. Nice. Okay, next. Just yell them out.
Optimistic, yellow.
All right, thank you.
Green.
Is there any way to enlarge this?
Oh, yeah.
That would be awesome.
Well, I'm going to try.
Thank you.
I'm going to try. Zoom in. Better?
Yeah, much.
Okay. That was
Thank
my
you.
try.
Thank you, Laura. Well, you
Yeah, and I'm sorry it's a little blurry.
Exhausted.
Exhausted. I'm gonna, whoops.
Oh, whoa.
Too much. All right, let me pop it.
I'd say restless.
Restless, yeah.
Ah, nice. Anybody else?
Hello?
Drained.
Restless, drained. I heard exhausted. I'm assuming drained is down here. Yep.
Yep.
Where was exhausted? Down here?
Excited.
Excited?
It's quite excited, yes. For
yeah, yay. I don't see excited though. Where do I find it?
It's toward the top, all the way to the right. It's probably behind your Zoom pictures.
3 down.
There it is. Oh, such good directions. Thank you guys. That was so,
you get the idea though, but the point is you can get a pulse. So what Laura's doing is she's doing it in a way that lets you get the pulse on the class. And in fact, students can do this independently too. You can do it individually for a check-in in the way that we described. You can also do it like as an exit ticket where you're just asking a single Likert type question, like on a 1 to 3 to 4, or rate yourself. But the key to this is following up with why. And ideally also you're anchoring it to, you can say overall, how are you feeling? But anchor it to like, you just read this text. How are you feeling? So you anchor it to a thing. that you want a response to, and then you can have a conversation about it.
Excellent. Okay. Another way you can facilitate bookends that many teachers like to do are entrance and exit tickets. And you can see that we're basically doing that today. We've used some of these tools in those ways. We used the Actually Curious kind of like as an entrance ticket in a way, but many teachers found that we worked with and consulted with over the last semester, meaning the spring of 2020, that if they built entrance and exit tickets into their curriculum, each time they met with students, that the students ended up wanting that structure, that it became something routine and reliable for them. And you can choose your area of focus for the entrance and exit tickets. So you could choose engagement, you could choose representation, you could choose expression, and you could ask questions that get at how are your students experiencing your design choices, and this will give you information to work with. So what we would like you to do now is to go to this place, this entrance and exit, this exit ticket here, and Diana will pop it into the chat for us, and quickly fill it out. It's literally 3 questions, 1 word each. Okay, so some other things that you could do, you could copy a basic Google form like that. You could do entrance and exit tickets that are around content. So you could do things like, what did you learn? What are you proud of? What did you find interesting? Or then you could tap into specific design choices that you made. I remember like some of the feedback I got when I was teaching my undergraduate courses at Tufts. I asked them about activities that I had designed, and for some of my activities, on the same activity, I would receive this feedback. This is the best activity I have ever done, and this is the worst activity I have ever done. So I found that really fascinating because even the responses to my design choices were variable between students. So again, we're gathering information. We're not acting on it yet. Right now, we're just gathering information. And now we are ready to transition into our closure. So between now and 3:30, we want for you to reflect, to take a few minutes to reflect. We'll give you 5 minutes to privately reflect and define a focus for our work together, which will be the focus of your work that we will work with you together on. Are you thinking that you'd like to focus on a lesson that you're delivering, a practice that you might be doing within your classroom or your virtual space, a policy at your school? And then within that, what empathy work will you do before our next session to get information from your students, teachers, professionals in your environment so that you can have an idea of where they're coming from? So we want to give you now 5 minutes to quietly reflect and do that in whatever way makes sense for you. If it's drawing something, if it's writing, if it's talking out loud, and then we're going to come together again in 5 minutes.
All right, that was 5.
I'm on mute. Thank you all so much. What we'd love for you to do is share in the chat what you think you might focus on. So again, as Laura mentioned, this is something that you, over the next 2 sessions, will be doing design work on. You're going to do empathy work between now and the next session on that piece with the intention of being able to implement or test that idea before the end of the series. Go ahead and drop what you're thinking in the chat. And while you're doing that, is there anyone that's willing to share? We could have a few people share their thoughts to the group. Or if you have a question. you can unmute and talk, or you can raise your hand and Diana will alert us. It looks like some folks are going to use the mood meter. That's great. Survey methods. Working on disengagement. This is a huge, most pressing problem right now. And I think this empathy work in UDL can really help with that for sure. The empathy interview, great. Awesome. And I want to say that the practices that we've been talking about today, these tools and methods, you know, I know that you all have seen that in being remote or hybrid, or in circumstances where we're in this weird situation where we're in person, but we have masks and we're not, you know, we have to be so much more intentional about connecting, because those easy interactions that used to happen in the hallway or kneeling down next to a student at their desk just don't happen in these circumstances. So these methods can help you connect. I'm just seeing in the chat a lot of folks saying, wanting to build out that sense of belongingness. Great. Okay, so we're at the close. I just want to thank you all so much for your time and attention today. We're really excited to see what you learn between now and next time. Laura and I just want to say that we are open to workshop your plan with you. So if between now and the next session, you would like to have a call with us to float what you're thinking, or you're just not sure what to do, we are so happy to have that conversation with you. And you have our information at the beginning of the slide deck, or Diana can connect you with us. So we would love to do that connection with you and to help you customize the methods. Also, if you're working on a platform that isn't Google, Laura is a tech whiz and we can help customize any of these tools for your use, or think about how you might implement depending on what platform you are using. We are so grateful to you all. Thank you so much. Laura, did you want to, or Jane or Diana want to say anything?
We are so excited. Again, reach out to us if you would like any consultation. I am not a whiz, but I love the challenge. So I just really, you know, like I love the complexities. So I will embrace any question about technology with an open mind and a heart to get it done. And we will send you a brief check-in to do between now and next time. It will be fun and low stress so that you will have a connection from us, even if you don't reach out to us. So you won't escape that easily. We're going to reach out to you. So we are excited. We can't wait. Diana, Jane?
I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us. And I want us to, if we can use our jazz hands to thank Gabby and Laura for all of their support today and
Thank
going
you.
forward. Yeah, really, really appreciate it. And it's fun. And again, I learn something every time. So thank you. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.